Hey, this week we talk about TWiT on the Raspberry Pi. We get caught up on what's going on with curl. Then there's the Tiny Watch, the reason maybe you should run AlmaLinux, and oh yes, Gnome still worries us. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 162, recorded July 27th. Open source invoice. Hey folks, it is Saturday, and you of course know what that means. It's time to get geeky, get your geek on. We're talking about Linux, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking about Linux and open source stuff. It is time for the Untitled Linux Show. It is, of course, not just me today. We've got Ken and Rob with us, and Rob, you were on top of it. You're ready to go there. Had your stand and everything. So let's dive in, and we got some fun stories to talk about. We've got some interesting stories to talk about. There's one in particular that's a worrying story to talk about. But we're going to start with something real fun first, and that is Ken's going to tell us about TWiT coming to new hardware.
Yes. Our favorite 9to5 Linux journalist, Marius Nexter, wrote about the latest release of TWiT 1.9.22, adding support for the latest Raspberry Pi devices, along with other improvements. Marius states the biggest new feature in the TWiT 1.9.22 release is support for updating the firmware on the Raspberry Pi 5 single-board computer. However, even though you'll be able to update your Raspberry Pi 5's firmware with TWiT, this support is marked as unofficial in this release. TWiT 1.9.22 also adds support for always loading the flash ROM plugin when using the open source Coreboot bootloader. It adds support for updating the firmware on the Framework SD expansion card. Adds a PCB tag in the USI-doc GUID to distinguish different revisions, and adds an explicit high-draw permission to the TWiT.service to improve support for multiple devices. This release fixes a critical warning if a device returns unexpected data from DFU upload, fixes a critical warning if the DMI manufacturer is an empty string, fixes several integer overflows from Coverity, fixes the Blackbird and Talus 2 baseboard details, and fixes a transient version number issue after flashing the Wacom USB devices. As always, I haven't covered everything in Marius' article, so definitely read it, especially if you are looking for support for a particular device.
I am looking to see what all this brings for the Raspberry Pi. Because part of updating the firmware on the Raspberry Pi is just installing the new kernel on the SD card. And that's slightly less interesting. And I'm trying to figure out whether it actually updates the on-the-board firmware as well. And I'm not immediately seeing all of the details about that. But it's neat to see, yet another way to support the Raspberry Pi. Not that there's anything wrong with Raspberry Pi OS, but it's it's nice to have options.
Yeah, alternatives are great. Ask Daffy Duck.
Okay. David, I'm real tempted to just roll with the joke and call you Rob all day.
Yeah, I'm Rob Undercover.
I don't know what I saw. I'm sure something caught my eye as I was introducing the show, and so I said Rob. Of course, we have David and not Rob with us today. No, I'm not going to just roll with the joke. We're going to call David. We're going to call it David a David and a spade. But he's got the details on some fast patching and some slow patching around the Linux world.
Is this by David Spade?
No, it is not by David Spade. My first link is from Phoronix and Michael Larabelle, so drinks high. But we've mentioned before about how AlmaLinux, especially since they are no longer bug for bug compatible with RHEL due to Red Hat's changes, have really taken that and run with it. And they're an example of what a vibrant open source community can look like. And so they strike yet again with an update. So this, I don't know how large a community is affected by this, but those doing VFX, specifically using the SideFX Houdini 3D animation software, have been running into an issue with the RHEL 9.4 update. There's a glibc bug that goes back to May that's making SideFX Houdini practically unusable. And they're still waiting for Red Hat to release an update on that, but AlmaLinux has pushed it out. So AlmaLinux, again, for at least the second time that I know of, maybe more than that, is taking advantage of the fact that they don't have to be bug for bug compatible with Red Hat and are squashing bugs. So that's always good to see. Just wanted to give them a shout out again. On the other end of the spectrum, my second link is a link to a Register article about Mozilla Thunderbird, everybody's favorite open source email client. And they have finally squashed a bug that has been open for 24 years. That's almost as old as I am. Not quite, but we're getting there. It was a bug that was opened last century, November 12th, 1999, with missing interface capability. Those using Thunderbird with Linux desktops were not able to see the new mail notification in the system tray when new email came in, which is pretty common. And maybe the only reason that there are some people sticking with Outlook. Probably not. But anyway, they finally fixed it. But there's just some funny comments. Of course, the Register, they put some tongue-in-cheek in their articles, which is why I like reading them. But in 2006, there was a complaint wondering why it had been so difficult. And that was answered with a, welcome to Mozilla's Bugzilla. Don't worry, you will get used to it. Patience is a virtue. Then 18 years later, the fix was developed. Not 18 months, 18 years was developed. And so now there has been a patch pushed out. Let's see, there was some effort made to try to get it into the 128 ESR last week, but that deadline wasn't met. So it's still coming, but good news, that 24-year-old bug will get squashed. Well, I guess technically it's a feature request. It wasn't a bug since it wasn't something broken. It was something missing. But that bug report will be closed sometime this year, maybe.
Oh, that's fun. Good for them for doing it. Hopefully it's optional. I'm not sure that I want a pop-up in my taskbar every time I get an email. That sounds stressful. Getting emails is stressful enough as it is when you get a bunch of them.
If it's not optional, open a bug report. 24 years from now, it'll be fixed.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Let's see. So while Ken unmutes himself, we're going to talk quickly about AlmaLinux. And it's interesting. It seems to me that there used to be a time when companies would say, make sure you use Red Hat because, we don't guarantee that this will work on CentOS. I seem to have memories of that. And I wonder whether we're eventually going to get to the point to where people will say, use AlmaLinux because there are outstanding things on Red Hat that haven't gotten fixed. Like, is AlmaLinux going to become the new preferred solution for people?
Yeah. Well, if it doesn't, it's at least, if they keep doing this, it's going to put a lot of pressure on Red Hat to step up their game. Yeah. And competition's never bad.
Yeah. There is the slight problem with this bit of competition that taking paying users away from Red Hat does not help AlmaLinux because AlmaLinux is a downstream. Like it's just it's a little complicated, right? Just because of the way that relationship works. We kind of want Red Hat to be healthy financially because they do sponsor a lot of work on Linux and the kernel and all of that. So it's complicated.
Well, you do have. I mean, Red Hat has a huge quality assurance and testing apparatus around their rollout. So I still think that they're going to be preferred for core mission critical things, but having an alternative where if you need something patched, you can jump to it quickly and then jump back because it's binary compatible is very useful.
Yep, that's true. That is true. All right. Well, on to our third story. I do not look forward to talking about this one. This is Gnome worries me still. This is not the first time that we've had this conversation, guys. It's, if I had a nickel for every time we had to have this conversation, I'd have 2 nickels, which is not a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice, right? So Gnome, Gnome has banned one of their board members from the community for a code of conduct violation. And that's not necessarily the problem. The problem is, in my opinion, that they've done it in secret. And that is essentially, like, that's the headline. Nobody knows why. As far as I can tell, they still don't know why. They've still not made any real substantive announcements about what's going on here. It's not great. Now, there's a few pieces to this, right? So when you get into the legal realm, you begin to fall into like these areas where you talk to a lawyer and your lawyer says, do not talk about this publicly. Everything that is said publicly needs to go through legal counsel, right? And that's like a thing because you get into liability issues. And so sometimes when things are happening legally, you don't talk about it. On the inverse side of that, when you're running an open source project and when you're running, an open project, not just talking about open source, but like when we're trying to run a project on the principles of openness and transparency, you want to be able to make these things public because that's what you do when you're running a transparent project. There's also some principles about people being able to respond to their accusers and all of that sort of play into this. But all of that to say, I don't think it is acceptable for a board member that was voted on and voted into the board by the community, by the members of the Gnome Foundation, to be removed without an explanation as to why. It's really problematic. And then you have something else that's happened since then, and that is that a member of in fact, it was like the lead Manjaro developer committed the unpardonable sin of linking to a Lunduke article in the GNOME discourse, which landed him a lifetime ban from the project as well for linking to an article. That sort of behavior, well, for one thing, it spends goodwill. It evaporates goodwill, in fact, and the capacity that I would have had to assume the best about the leadership at GNOME, hearing that they banned someone from their community for linking to an article that they did not approve of the person that wrote the article. The fact that resulted in a ban, that evaporates my capacity to think well of them, and so I'm worried about GNOME. I really am, specifically the GNOME Foundation, and I don't want to overreact to this, but like there comes a point to where you have to start thinking about forking the GNOME Foundation. Like I don't even know how that works. But even more broadly than that, something I was thinking about as I looked at this throughout the week, we probably have some work to do to figure out how you codify openness into like the articles of a foundation. So like, how do you, so we have the OSI definition for code, and we know how to make code open in the license. That there may be some work that we need to do. How do you codify openness into the articles that make up these organizations that control it? So I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns here. But I have some very strong hesitations about the future of the Gnome Foundation, let me put it that way. And I think it's not just me. From what I've been reading, there's a lot of this from the community where people are absolutely fed up with the heavy-handedness, but also the secrecy that goes along with it. So I will turn it over to you guys. What do y'all think?
I think if nothing else, there will be, to quote Microsoft, learnings from this for everybody else. Because sometimes you learn by going through stuff. Sometimes you learn by watching somebody else fail spectacularly.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And so, like, I don't know. I guess there's definitely a possibility that the Sonny Piers, I believe was his name, like he could have done something bad enough to deserve being banned, right? Like I guess that's a thing. Although I have hesitations about the entire idea of someone doing something outside of the project. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion for what it's worth, but in my opinion, you should write your code of conducts such that code of conduct enforcement only happens for things that happen inside the project. Because what somebody does outside the project, that's their personal lives, and you really don't want to go down that road of kicking people out of your project for things happening in their personal. Like it's not a good place. No, if you really think about it, nobody wants that, because that opens the door to a lot of things that are just not very nice. So in my opinion, if you want to have a code of conduct, that's fine, but it needs to be written strictly such that you only enforce things that are officially done in the project. And then I am beginning to feel very strongly on top of that it is just a bad idea to have your code of conduct committee siloed off away from the rest of the project. I think that's a bad idea. They need to be, for one thing,
to the project.
They need to be answerable to the project, but they also need to have, to borrow another turn of phrase, skin in the game. Like they need to also be contributors, because otherwise they just don't. There's no real good understanding of the things that are going on in the project. Anyway,
are we looking like, say, for a representation of your peers?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a fair question, right? Like, do you want your code of conduct committee to be peers, sort of like a jury? I think so. I think that probably makes sense. I don't know. There's obviously a bunch of different opinions on the entire idea of code of conduct. And I think sort of as like the open source world, we're still growing up into this and trying to figure out how it's going to work. And like you say, Dave, like you say, it's a learning opportunity. People are looking at this and going, "Oh, okay, this is something to be aware of." Hopefully, the lessons will be learned. And I would like to see. I don't use Gnome, but I would like to see the Gnome Foundation get back to a place of healthiness and trustworthiness. But I think there's some work to be done.
And something else is they need to include in the code of conduct a method of appealing any policies coming out of it.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's a good point. So Derecho has a point here that is interesting, and I don't know how much I want to get into this because it gets into political stuff. But he says trial by jury has a serious problem with consistency for various reasons. In some cases, that's a feature, not a bug, because like there are times that if you just blindly apply the law, you end up in weird. So blindly applying the law finds weird corner cases where you then look at it and go, "Oh, well, that's certainly not what was intended by that law," or that is not actually appropriate in this case. So like that's part of the purpose behind trial by jury is so that human beings with their own like common sense can right something that's wrong. Anyway, so we could talk about this, but again, it kind of veers off into political things that just we're not interested in talking about here. So, anybody have any more thoughts on that before we move on? I feel like I'm walking on a balancing beam here. Like, oh, I want to talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it too much.
Maybe we virtually are.
I guess.
That's technology punditry right there. I mean, because we want to focus on technology, but life tends to keep getting in the way.
Technology would be great if it just weren't for all the people in it. to borrow a saying from a different realm. All right, Ken, let's talk about VirtualBox then.
Yes, and here we're hearing from both Bobby Borisoff and Marius Nestor. They wrote about the VirtualBox 7.1 beta release, giving us a sneak peek at what is coming. They both talk about the update's revamped Qt6-based graphics user interface, tailored to different expertise levels, basic and experienced. Marius even talks about Wayland's support for clipboard sharing on both Linux guests and hosts. VirtualBox 7.1 also promises updated Oracle Cloud infrastructure with new functions to clone and reset compute instances, as well as support for the performance dashboard to display resource usage for local virtual machines. It promises to improve the performance of the screen recording functionality on all supported platforms, update the Oracle VirtualBox extension pack to adjust the PUEL license by removing the duplicated evaluation option, and add a new MSDB/KEX certificates to newly created virtual machines. VirtualBox 7.1 beta introduces a comprehensive overhaul of its network address translation engine, including support for IPv6, expanding connectivity options, and future-proofing the software. If you are using the latest Apple hardware, you will be glad to hear about the software extending its support to the macOS on ARM hosts, enabling ARM virtualization for Linux and BSD VMs. Since I'm just covered some of the improvements, I do encourage you to follow the links in the show notes if you want more details about VirtualBox 7.1 beta and how you can try it, but I would not recommend it on a production system.
No, probably not. Ken, I can't help but think of the old John Wayne movie Quiet Man, where the antagonist, every time he sees John Wayne's character, he will carry a handkerchief around with him because he's got this thing. It's like he hates him, and so he spits every time he says his name. And towards the end of the movie, they're forced to cooperate together. So he has this handkerchief, and every time he says his name, you can tell he covers his mouth with the handkerchief and spits into the handkerchief. That way, nobody can see him do it. That's Ken with Oracle right now. So I am, I'm. It's interesting to see this continue on and the things that are new in there. Wayland support for clipboard sharing, that would actually be pretty nice. Something about the clipboard on Wayland is just weird. I've continually had just edge corner oddness with the clipboard on Wayland.
Yeah, it's all the security enhancements preventing applications from seeing each other that they just don't support that global sharing all that well. They're still working those bugs out.
Yeah, that's probably true.
An easy way to turn on the backlighting for your keyboard.
I think that works mostly now, at least.
I found a hack for mine.
It depends upon what keyboard you're using. Like if you're using a Razer keyboard, you got to build an out of tree kernel module to make it work, which doesn't have to be a kernel module.
Well, actually, I found
hardware support's weird.
Manual system D service that you can set to run every 5 seconds.
Yeah, that sounds great. Oh,
Otherwise, when you hit the num key or the shift lock, it'll turn it back off. And then that
yeah, that could
service
be a
runs
problem, I suppose.
and turns the backlight back on.
Wow.
Oh boy.
That's great.
Which is why today I'm running with the X server.
Understandable.
Wow. I'm sure Wayland will get fixed within 24 years.
I mean, it's been almost that long they've been working on it, right? Okay. Save us, David, by telling us about the newest open source smartwatch that we can actually afford.
Yes, you can afford it. It's actually available. It is the TinyWatch S3. It's an open source customizable smartwatch powered by an ESP32 S3 system on a chip, SoC. Now, it's not for the faint of heart, so I'm not sure that all of us should be running out to buy one. In fact, I find it very interesting, but I don't have the time or resources dedicated to it, so you won't see me wearing one. Because it does not come with, it's not breadboard compatible. It does not come with any headers. However, it is completely open source, both hardware and software. The repository has KiCad or KiCad. It's KiCad, design files and schematics. It's got the firmware files, the STL and step files for the case, example projects. So if you've always wanted to experiment with what you carry around on your wrist, this is an open source project for you. And it's pretty neat. It's rectangular, standard watch face size. It does not include the battery or watch band, but you can buy it for only $60. So if it's something you got some time to kick around with, something to play around with, and it seems interesting to you, it does have a clock chip. It's got sensors, 6-axis IMU, magnometer, I guess, the microphone. It's got magnetic buzzer, a haptics motor. There's a few buttons on it. There's a power on-off button, a reset button, a boot button. And it does have ESD protection on the USB and buttons, 2 LEDs, one for power and one to indicate charging, 3D high gain antenna. So it's got some potential. And it's always cool to just see open source spreading into all form factors.
Yeah, the ESP32 S3, that is a fairly capable little microcontroller. Now, you're not running Linux on it, but you can do quite a bit with it. You could do C++ code, do quite a bit. I would love to see something like something like this that had GPS and LoRa on it. So I've got one, a little band. This is from LilyGo, the T-Impulse, I think this one is called, but it does not have the ESP32 S3. This has a much lower powered chip on it, and so limited in what we can actually do with it. But this is cool. There's a lot that you can do with this sort of thing with custom firmware. Or I'm sure even with their firmware. Do you know what the battery life is like?
It doesn't say in the review of it here.
That's one of the other things that's tricky on devices like this. How do you get decent battery life without making the thing massive?
By having it turn itself off periodically?
Well, yeah, but that gets tricky too, because you want to be able to see the time, and so then you build things into it like shake to wake. But if you're too aggressive with trying to save battery life, then the thing will go into hard hangs where you've got to hard boot them to get them to come back up. And it's fun. Yes, I've done a little bit of embedded development. I know where some of the pitfalls lie. But it's cool. Hopefully people will jump on board with this. Usually this sort of project has a fairly low barrier to entry. It's much easier to get in and hack on this than something like the Linux kernel. And so somebody interested in just doing I assume it's in C++. That's what a lot of these are written in these days. Wants to do some of that kind of hacking. This would be a great project to jump in on and try to do some simple stuff.
It mentions that if you've got some Arduino experience, Arduino Core framework specifically, that would be.
Yes. So Arduino, it's Platform IO and Arduino. Yeah. So the Arduino Core, the Arduino framework has like taken over the embedded world. There are Arduino Core sort of layers for a lot of embedded chips, and this Platform IO plus the Arduino framework is really pretty popular. The Meshtastic firmware that I work with is exactly what we use. We could probably run Meshtastic on this just without a LoRa chip. It's not going to be very useful. That's sort of the main thing that we try to do. So without that being on there, yeah, like I say though, this would be a fun project for somebody that really wants to kind of dip a toe into embedded development. I think this would be a really fun one to start with. So,
and it even comes with a sample Hello World amp.
There you go. There you go. $59, not too bad. All right. So let's see. What else do we have? Oh, yes. Rust. Rust in the kernel. Some fun things have happened with kernel 6.11. The notable thing here is that we've got a minimum Rust toolchain version as opposed to a precise Rust toolchain version. And this is actually a much bigger deal than it sounds. So one of the things that has been a pain about Rust in the kernel is they're having to do so much development on the Rust language and the Rust compilers as they're doing development on the Rust kernel. And so with each version of the kernel, it's been, okay, you've got to use, Rust 1.75 for this version of the kernel. And that's the only one that it'll work with. You can't use 1.76. You can't use 1.74. It's got to be 1.75, right? And that's just because things have been changing so fast to make this work. And then with 6.11, they finally have gotten to the point to where they say, okay, this is going to work with Rust 1.78 and 1.79 and 1.80, as well as the current beta and the current nightly, which is probably going to be in 1.81 and maybe 1.82, right? So you've got 3 to 5 versions of Rust that are going to work with this one kernel release. And what that does is it makes life way easier on distro developers. But it also will make life a lot easier on end users who want to run a newer kernel on their maybe slightly older distro. It's going to make it way easier to build it and get the Rust support in there. And so this is a good thing. And then also with this, something that is in the Phoronix article is that upstream Rust has now added the kernel to their continuous integration tests. And so if they make a change that breaks kernel compilation, they know about it right away before it gets pushed out. And so, not to say that won't ever happen, but it will now happen in a coordinated sort of way. And so, rather than a surprise breakage, they're now going to be able to say, let's say in 3 versions from now this happens. So, okay, so kernel 6.11 works up through Rust version this, and then here's where the changeover happens. And so if you're doing kernel 6.13, you're going to need this version of Rust, whatever, but it's going to be, it'll be published and be a lot more flexible. So again, and we've talked about this before, but this is Rust in the kernel, but it's also the kernel language itself kind of growing up and maturing into this idea of really being usable here. And we had a question last week about whether there's any actually useful Rust code in the kernel, and I tried to do some research on that. Somebody pointed out the Asahi GPU driver, and yes, that's written in Rust. As far as I can tell, it's not actually landed upstream yet. So I'm still not sure that we have any useful Rust, like actually usable Rust in the kernel yet. I don't know. I didn't have a whole lot of time to look into that, but I did spend some time this week trying to find that, and was not able to pin down an answer on that one.
Well, my command line tip later is going to demonstrate Rust being used in user space.
It's used in user space all over the place. Interesting stuff. Do we want to talk about curl?
Well, it depends. Do you want to curl your hair or not?
No, I don't curl my hair, but I curl downloads.
Then, and I do apologize if I butcher this, Cynthia Kumar Palani, also known as SK of OS Technics, tells about Daniel Stenberg announcing the latest release of curl 8.9.0, one of the oldest software still in use. This marks the 258th release of curl with a whopping 260 bug fixes, 11 changes, and 2 security fixes. 2 security fixes, that'll definitely curl your hair. The security fixes address CVE 2024-6197 and 2024-6874. I'll let you look up what those are about. Curl 8.9.0 also introduces several new command line options to enhance its functionality. Users can now set the IP type of service, traffic class with the --IP-TOS option. Then you have the --MPTCP option, which enables multipath TCP for connections. That should come in handy. And then also the --VLAN-priority option, allowing you to set the VLAN priority field for IP traffic. There's also the --keep-alive-CNT or count option, letting users specify the number of keep-alive probes before marking a connection as dead. Now, improvements include GNU TLS and WOOF SSL supporting CA caching, significantly speeding up serial TLS connections. Embed TLS adds support for CURLOPT_CERTINFO. I would want to say that curl cert info, allowing applications to retrieve certificate information. The URL API introduces, I'm going to try saying this instead of sounding out the letters, curl no guess scheme for better scheme detection. I've provided a link to the SK's article if you want more details about this update and how to download and install it.
Yeah, interesting. So there's something really fun in this particular release of curl. You talked about those security vulnerabilities. One of them was it's a crash. It could maybe be used to run arbitrary code. It's a double free, I think. But it's in the handling of certain like ASN.1 security certificates. And in the description of the bug, the curl guys say this is specifically a C program error. And what they mean by that is this is a glitch that was done specifically because this is written in C. And if it was written in another language, this probably wouldn't have happened. And I read that and I'm like, somebody's getting the Rust/Go bug. I wonder if we're going to see another language pop up in curl eventually. It really
wouldn't be the
intrigued
first
me.
time they've taken and converted one of the utilities we use from C or C++ to curl or to Rust.
Yeah. We talked to, about a week and a half ago, we talked to the Rust Core Utils guys on Floss Weekly. And interestingly enough, after we had that conversation, I got a comment from one of the OG Core Utils guys. And they're like, hey, how about us? We'd like to talk to you too. Okay, fine. So that's going to be interesting.
When have you booked them in?
A couple of weeks from now. Let's see. I can pull it up for you.
Did you ask if they were available the 30th?
No, the 20th. They are set for August 20th. No, I was hoping that they would go for the 30th. We like it when people line up earlier rather than later, but no, that's just what worked out for them. Anyway, so that's fascinating with curl though. I wonder whether we're gonna see something in there eventually. What's next?
Homebrew.
Homebrew.
Yes.
David,
yes,
let's talk about homebrew. And Work brew.
Yes. So the irony of me talking about homebrew is I am an avowed anti-Apple non-fanboy. But we're talking about open source, and I do like me some open source. And this is so I linked to an interview that touches on the open source history of homebrew and a discussion with the originator and primary developer of it, Mike McQuaid, who is a Scot from Scotland. And it's got some interesting notes in there. So first off, it starts out talking about the fact that across all operating systems, there are still 101 different ways of trying to update packages, whether they're open source or commercial, closed source. And it talks about the issues with all of them. Even Linux, our beloved language, you have to use apt or deb or RPM or DNF or yum or whichever the latest package has been released to centralize them all and become the package manager to rule them all. There's always some inconsistencies. There's always some issues. Windows isn't much better. Recently, there's been a few things that they've released. But Homebrew is specifically focused on Mac. So Homebrew was originally created for developers. And if you speak to any developer that uses Mac, there's a pretty good chance that they're using Homebrew. It's designed to keep the dependencies that are needed for developing, testing, and running updated, but it has grown beyond that. It has methods for installing graphical and proprietary applications, managing background services, and creating reproducible lists of what's installed on a machine, which are all extremely useful pieces of implementation. Sorry, I did kind of flip that. But one of the interesting things about it is that at various points in its history, it has been the most popular and contributed to project on GitHub, which is, it's always impressive to see something with so much passion in the community. So it was started in 2009 by Max using the Ruby programming language. It's been consistently popular, as I mentioned. There's been a couple of other things out there, but Homebrew has really just kind of taken over. And let's see, I already mentioned we're interviewing Mike McQuaid here, and he had a decades-long role at GitHub and then moved on to found his own company.
Interesting.
He was asked what it's like maintaining one of the largest open source projects largely in your spare time in the northern extremities of Europe. And he said, over here, tech's not nearly as big as it is in the US, but he had a young lad come up to him in the gym today and said, "Oh, you're the homebrew guy. I can't believe a tech celebrity goes to my gym." He said, "As a Scot, it made me cringe a bit. Public recognition and compliments are rare." So, a little bit of culture shock there.
That's funny.
But one of the things I thought was really interesting about, and this just kind of is something that, we talk about open source projects a lot and all of that. He described the people who, when you're running a large project, a popular project, you get a lot of hate from people. People who are just frustrated because they hit a bug or because you changed something and they didn't read the release notes and they don't like the change and now something's broken. So how does Mike handle that? He said, there are a lot of entitled, noisy users in open source who contribute very little and like to shout at people and make them feel bad. One of my strengths, and this is something we all can learn, is thick skin, is that I have very little time for those people and I just insta-block them or close their issues. And that is very necessary. But all that to lay the groundwork that he is creating a spin-off from Homebrew called Workbrew, which is going to be a paid product. specifically used for IT companies that need to manage Mac OS, and it's got some business specific stuff. I'm not going to delve into that because this is not a Mac show, but he is an open source purist, and he also said, we've seen a lot of churn in the last few years from companies that made licensing decisions 5 or 10 years ago, which have now changed quite dramatically and have generated quite a lot of community backlash. We've talked about that on this show. He said, I'm very sensitive to that, and I am a little bit of an open source purist in that I still consider the open source initiative's definition of open source to be what open source means. If you don't comply with that, then you can be another thing, but I think you're probably not open source. And he is focused on keeping Workbrew and Homebrew separate, and maintaining Homebrew as a purely open source product moving forward, with Workbrew just building off of that for business specific needs. So really cool article, really cool person. Always cool to get perspectives of open source people from other cultures and things, and their perspective on stuff. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So I have used Homebrew back in the past. Once upon a time, I tried to give somebody a custom VPN for specific reasons on their Mac machines, and to install, boy, I think it may have been OpenVPN back then. But anyway, to get that installed on the Mac, Homebrew was the way that we did it. So I've had a little bit of experience there, and yeah, it's great. There's all kinds of Homebrew is basically a package manager. Like, you have DNF in Fedora. It's like the package manager that you wish macOS had. So it's a pretty cool project. There is also Mac ports. We have a user. I am not going to try to pronounce that name. We have a user in the Discord that is talking about the difference between Mac ports and Homebrew and why he uses Mac ports instead of Homebrew. But it's worth noting that there is an alternative out there. That idea of pushy users being a problem is fascinating. Simon Phipps noted one time that one of the ways that open source projects get in trouble is they let the project start to be run by those by that set of users that doesn't really contribute anything, but is very needy and very demanding. And one of the ways that open source projects die is by giving in to that group of users. And I thought that was interesting to think about as a danger that we don't talk about very often. So it sounds like he is tuned into that possible problem.
Why am I thinking of the phrase prima donna when I hear that description?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's fun that they are trying to do this like business-oriented version of Homebrew. If you go to their website and to some of their documentation, like what they're trying to capture are businesses where the employees would love to use Homebrew, but like the business IT department doesn't want them to install it on their machines. And so it's like they're trying to make a corporate version of it that's going to be more palatable. And I think that's interesting. It's kind of the old one of the old ways that open source has made money, and that is a business to be able to use anything. They're like, well, we have to get an invoice for it, and in some cases, the open source project is like, we don't make invoices. And it seemed to me for a while, it's like maybe we just need to make a business. And I think the moment has passed, but maybe somebody just needs to make a business that is all about charging people for open source because they can't use it otherwise. Like, let somebody handle that for you. Everybody would win. But I think we're kind of past that. So I was too young to make my millions by that idea.
I think it's still a valid opportunity to resell.
Yeah, and you have some people like Tidelift and a couple of other projects that are out there now trying to do that sort of thing. But anyway, I wish the Homebrew and now Workbrew guys all the best. I think it's a neat idea, and could be things we should name the show the Open Source Invoice. I like it.
It sounds like Workbrew would give the IDT department a method of installing it for those users that say,
Yeah.
I could do this with Homebrew. No,
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah, bring your own IT is like, it's a problem in some cases. And I know some IT departments really don't like it.
Almost as much as they don't like BYO, bring your own device.
Yeah. Sometimes the whole shadow IT thing is even worse, though. You hear stories about servers set up in the bathroom that nobody uses, and alternate email accounts that are officially unofficial, and all of that. It's crazy stuff, crazy stories out there. All right, we've got one more Linux story to talk about, and Fedora went for it. And hopefully this is not going to turn into us being worried about Fedora. I don't think it will, because it looks to me like they have been very careful about trying to do this the right way. And so what this is Fedora is now going to have telemetry. They are going to collect data, but it is opt-in. It is not on by default. It is strictly opt-in. And then they're also taking care to not collect identifying personal details. They're not going to collect IP addresses. There's going to be efforts to prevent fingerprinting. And the other thing that they do is they categorize it. And so I believe you can even turn the different categories on and off, I think, is part of this. And so they're talking about hardware details, like they want to know what CPU are people using, what graphics card are people using, what camera is people using, and then things like system settings. What's your display language? What accessibility features are actually being used out there? And then they've got desktop usage patterns. That's going to be things like what applications are people actually using? How many open workspaces are there? Performance reporting, which is disk and memory usage. And then evidence of problems, which is counts of system crashes, out of memory events, and app crashes. Of course, there is more information, but Fesco has unanimously passed this 6-0. It is cleared to be part of Fedora Workstation 42. So they've gone for it. They're doing it. They're doing metrics in Fedora, and like I said, I think the way that they're doing this, they're being very careful about it, and especially because it is strictly opt-in, I don't really see that anyone should have a huge problem with this. If you don't like it, don't turn it on, and let the rest of us go about our business. If you don't like it, don't turn it on.
Yeah. So I mentioned that we can learn, projects can learn by watching people go down in flames, other projects go down in flames, but we can also learn by watching people do it right. And, we like to pull out the Steam survey and say, hey, look, Linux is up there. But those sorts of things only happen because there are people submitting analytical data. So, I always try to turn that stuff on for all of my stuff because, I don't have a security issue and I want to get representation. But, if you do have a reason to not do it, you don't have to. And that's the right way to do it.
Yeah.
And we don't need to know the reason.
That's true. The Phoronix comments are, well, so far they've been refreshingly sane. I'm sure if I keep going, it's going to get worse and worse because that's just what happens in the Phoronix comment forums. So anyway, good for Fedora for doing this the right way. It seems like they tried to do this a few versions back and they did not do it the right way. And there was quite the user backlash from it. This seems like a decent way to go.
Was this before or after Audacity tried it?
I don't know. And to be fair, the Audacity one was not as bad as it seemed. And Audacity also listened to their users and made changes to the way they were going to do it before they rolled it out. Right? So it did not go as badly as it could have, for what it's worth.
Or as badly as the media was reporting it?
Yeah. All right, let's get into some command line tips. And Ken is going to take it first and is going to talk about core utils.
Yes. Jonathan, I can thank you and the recent Floss episode where you interviewed the Rust core utils maintainer, Silvestri Ledru. I think I'm saying that right.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to check the Rust core utils out. Now, I have captured the screen showing output from the core utils after I installed the Rust core utils, which is actually a multi-call binary similar to DistroBox, containing all the commands currently implemented. They can be seen by typing, of all things, core utils space -- help. As you'll see in my first screenshot, if you've got the show notes open, you can click there. I'm going to go ahead and post the document I'm talking about into the live chat as well. And give me a minute here to do that for you. And let me know if I don't have it shared properly this time.
Well, just as long as it gets shared by the time people try to watch it.
But if you look in the first screenshot, you'll see it's got, it gives the core utils a version, and then in parentheses says it's a multi-call binary, gives usage how it's used. In other words, core utils, whatever function you want, and then any arguments you need. And then it gives the currently defined functions as of, I'm running core util 0.0.27. And if you quickly glance through there, it does have the common ones, CP, LS, even date, and some of the ones that we've covered over the episodes for the GNU core utils. But if I went ahead and demonstrated using the command, say, ls by typing core util space ls, followed by ls. Then to find all of its options, I went ahead and did a -- help. That actually turned into 7 full screens, but I only put the first 2 and the last one of that into the screenshots I've got there, instead of having you look at everything. You can always install it yourself if you want to see all of them. But the one I really thought that you'd like to see, John, is where I used the core utils space CP. Now, with this one, I did a -G, which is the shorthand way of saying -- progress, as y'all were talking about in the Floss episode. And that's the very last screenshot I've got there. You'll see it's got a progress bar. The file I copied wasn't that long, so it was real quick. I probably needed to put a time in front of that so you can see how long it was taken for some of this. And that'd be a good task for y'all if y'all want to play around with it, is do a time and compare the time using the GNU core util, say ls, to see how long it takes compared to the core util ls command.
Yeah, that could be really interesting. All right, very cool. David, what do you have?
Well, due to work requirements, I was not able to join you all last week. But last week, there was a massive catastrophe.
Is that what you were working on last week?
No, it was
okay.
not, actually. It's completely unrelated to that. But I wanted to mention that if you have a situation where somebody screws up your Windows machine and you're stuck in a boot loop, yes, you can use the Windows pre-execution environment and you can use all the other tools. But hey, Linux has options, and we do have a way to mount BitLocker encrypted drives. So I've got a link to a process, which I'm not going to go through because it's pretty involved, but I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that it was possible. So if you need to do it for some reason, you can. So the link is to Linux Uprising blog post on it. There's a lot of other ones out here, but it uses a tool called DisLocker. DISLOCKER, which is a tool for reading BitLocker encrypted partitions on both Linux and Mac OS. When you use that tool, and it's in all the standard repositories, so you should be able to just DNF install DisLocker or apt install DisLocker, depending on your preferred flavor. You're going to find your bitlocked partition. You can use your standard fdisk or LSBLK from the command line, or if you prefer something graphical, gparted. If you pull it up, it will identify the file systems as BitLocker on that partition. So that lets you find your partition like /dev sdb 2 in the example on here, but might be SDC, or depends on how many drives you have in there, and also what kind of drive you have. Once you've located that, you're going to you're going to use DisLocker to unencrypt it. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a file that is the virtual file system that is the unencrypted bitlocked partition. And you will need to pass it the BitLocker encryption key, just like you would if you've ever booted up a Windows machine with BitLocker and it makes you type in the key. If you don't have those, as long as you've got a Microsoft account, it should be stored in your Microsoft account. But if you don't have a Microsoft account and you're using BitLocker, make sure you keep those keys somewhere.
Print them out, keep them somewhere.
Yeah. I had a client that printed them out and kept them in his safe. Because, if you lose that, then, you're not getting your data back. But so once it's unencrypted, it creates a file that you use a mount loop on, which allows you to just loop back into a file. It's the same way you would mount like an ISO or any other file that you need to mount as a partition. And at that point, you specify, what type it is. Like if it's NTFS, you'll need to use the NTFS 3G, or if it's exFAT, you'll use the exFAT fuse file system. And then pretty much you can use all your tools like normal. So it's out there. It's possible. If it's something that you run into needing to do, hopefully this is a good starting point, but at least simply having that knowledge filed away that, hey, it is possible, can often be what you need.
Yeah. So you mean it won't decrypt BitLocker when you don't know the password?
Nope.
That's good. That's good. We would be worried if it would. All right. Very good. So I've got one, and this is important to me for a very, very niche use case, but you might find some other uses for it. Command line tip is PDF grep. And it does exactly what you would think it does. It lets you grep the text of a PDF. This is important for me because I game master for a Pathfinder game, which is similar to Dungeons & Dragons, and we will have rules questions come up or lore questions, and someone's like, can you remind me what my Skyseer ability does? I was like, I don't know. I don't even know what page of which PDF that would be on. Okay, so you can do PDF grep. And so I just, this is my example because this is the first PDF that I found is one of the manuals for the game. PDF grep, Skyseer, and then I grep the second module in the series. So it's named Skyseer. And it will tell you, here's all of the text in that PDF that matches all of the lines. And so a couple of flags that might be really useful for you is -in, that will tell you which page of the PDF it's on. And then -C and then a number will give you that many lines above and below. And so on this particular PDF grep, I'm grepping for the word Skyseer. I'm saying -in, I want to see the page numbers. And then I have a -C2. I want to give 2 lines before and 2 lines after each of these matches. And it did. It shows me a bunch of places where this particular word is mentioned in the PDF. And so I can scan through here really quickly and go, that's the one where I actually want to read about. Oh, that's on page 7. And then you can open the PDF and get the whole thing in context. I will use this a lot. I did not know this existed until not very long ago, and this is actually really great. I'm excited about this already. PDF grep. It is in Pop! OS at least, so in probably all of your Debians. It is available from apt. I'm assuming it is in DNF as well, and if not, there are ways to get it. So this is cool. All right. Well, that is the show. We've had our news. We've had our tips. I'll let each of the guys get in the last word if they want to. And we'll start with David.
I don't have anything significant. I would just encourage you to really think about using CrowdStrike and avoid it.
Okay, so hey, this is actually something we could talk about real quick. So CrowdStrike does have a Linux antivirus, and their version of CrowdStrike on Linux runs with a kernel module. And back a few months ago, they crashed a whole bunch of Linux boxes the same way that they crashed Windows boxes last week. The internet has been brutal towards CrowdStrike, but probably the most fun was some of the other vendors. Like, we tried to tell you this was a bad idea, guys. Don't use CrowdStrike. Don't use out-of-tree kernel modules. Use something like, and of course, our solution, which doesn't.
Yeah.
What are the other really interesting things, though? I got this from David Plummer, who's a retired Microsoft guy. He was talking about Microsoft tried to build out a antivirus API back years ago, and like government regulators stopped them from doing that because they were of the opinion that it would be picking and choosing who was going to win. Like it was exerting too much control over the platform. But like in retrospect, we would have been a lot better off had they been allowed to build out this antivirus API rather than all of these antivirus manufacturers running as kernel drivers, which, has been proven out to be a dumb idea.
Yeah, I didn't really plan that out well. I realize now my tip my ending note should have been, it's too late to short CrowdStrike.
Oh, you could have made some money on that. They dropped like 10% of their stock value overnight. Yeah, it was not good.
And kept going down.
It did it? Okay. So the bounce that I saw in the news was the dead cat bounce then, and then it just kept falling afterwards. Well, that's not surprising. All right, Ken, any final thoughts?
Just want to remind everybody, backup, and then back up somewhere else.
Yep. I had a bit of a scare this week. Somebody called me up and like, we had a folder disappear off the server. Those of you in IT know this feeling. Dave, you know this feeling very well. It's like, I'm pretty sure the backups are working on that system. Let's go check. They were. And I will give you a free tip. When you get that phone call, usually what has happened is the customer has tried to double click on a folder and they've accidentally clicked and dragged and they've put it inside of another folder. 9 times out of 10, you will find whatever they're looking for in a folder that's like alphabetically right above or right below, because that is what they've done. But the backups were working and they had just misplaced it. So, but it was good to, go in there and double check all of that.
And remember, when you're using rsync, if you're backing up a directory, put the slash after that last part of the directory that you're pointing, using as a source to indicate you want everything inside that directory to be copied, not the directory into the other directory.
Yep. Or else you end up with two different copies of it. So, all right, that is our show today. Thank you to Dave and Ken for being here. I sure appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you to everyone that stuck with us and watched. We had a lot of fun. We will be back next week at the same time, same channel. And of course, don't forget about Club TWiT. The QR code right up there. When you go to watch this later, make sure to scan it. Think about supporting. Join the club. It's about the cost of a cup of coffee per week. No, per month. Oh my goodness, it's so cheap. It's only a cup of coffee per month, and it's a lot of fun. You get access to the Discord, the ad-free versions of all the shows, get to chat and hang out with us. It is a lot of fun. You ought to join. And again, we appreciate everybody watching us both live and on the download, and we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show.